let's read this. It's a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket, and this is a bedtime story. Just a disclaimer, I am dyslexic, so I probably might stammer when I read. I've never really grew out of that, but this is giving me confidence, and hopefully this can help you relax and sleep. I'm going to be keeping this low, kind of gentle tone to help you go sleep. So, sorry, there's a lot of introduction pages before you get to the first chapter. Chapter 1. If you are interested in stories with happy endings, you would be better off reading some other book. In this book, not only is there no happy ending, there is no happy beginning and very few happy things in the middle. This is because not very many happy things happened in the lives of the Baudelaire youngsters. Violet, Claus, Sonny Baudelaire were intelligent children, and they were charming and resourceful and had pleasant facial features, but they were extremely unlucky, and most everything that happened to them was rife with misfortune, misery and despair. I'm sorry to tell you this, but that is how the story goes. Their misfortune began one day at Briny Beach. The three Baudelaire children had lived with their parents in an enormous mansion at the heart of the dirty and busy city, and occasionally their parents gave them permission to take a rickety trolley. The word rickety, you probably know here, means unsteady or unlikely to collapse alone to the seashore, where they would spend the day, a sort of vacation as long as they were home for dinner. This particular morning it was grey and cloudy, which didn't bother the Baudelaire children one bit. When it was hot and sunny, Briny Beach was crowded with tourists, and it was impossible to find a good place to lay one's blanket. On a grey and cloudy day, the Baudelaire children had the beach to themselves to do whatever they liked. Violet Baudelaire, the eldest, liked to skip rocks. Like most 14-year-olds, she was a right-handed, so the rocks skipped farther across the murky water when Violet used her right hand than when she used her left. As she skipped rocks, she was looking at the horizon and thinking about an invention she wanted to build. Anyone who knew Violet well could tell she was thinking hard and long, because her hair was tied up in a ribbon to keep it out of her eyes. Violet had a real knack for inventing and building strange devices, so her brain was often filled with images of pulleys, levers and gears, and she never wanted to be distracted by something as trivial as her hair. This morning she was thinking about how to construct a device that could retrieve a rock after he had skipped it in the ocean. Claus, the middle child and the only boy, liked to examine creatures in tidal pools. Claus was a little older than 12 and wore glasses which made him look intelligent. He was intelligent. The Baudelaire parents had an enormous library in their mansion, a room filled with thousands of books on nearly every subject. Being only 12, Claus, of course, had not read all of the books in the Baudelaire libraries, but he had read a great many of them and had retained a lot of the information from his readings. He knew how to tell an alligator from a crocodile. He knew who killed Julius Caesar, and he knew much about the tiny, slimy animals found at Briny Beach, which he was examining now. Sonny Baudelaire, the youngest, liked to bite things. She was an infant and very small for her age, scarcely larger than a boot. What she lacked in size, however, she made up with the size and sharpness of her teeth. Sonny was at an age where one mostly speaks in a series of unintelligible shrieks, except when she used a few actual words in a vocabulary like bottle, mummy and bite. Most people had trouble understanding what it was that Sonny was saying. For instance, this morning she was saying gag over and over, which meant, "Look at that mysterious figure emerging from the fog." Sure enough, in the distance, along the misty shore of Briny Beach, there could be seen a tall figure striding towards the Baudelaire children. Sonny had already been staring and shrieking at the figure. For some reason, when Claus looked up from the spinny crab he was examining and saw it too, he reached over and touched Violet's arm, bringing her out of her inventing thoughts. "Look at that," Claus said, and pointed towards the figure. It was drawing closer, and the children could see a few details. It was about the size of an adult, except its head was tall and rather square. "What do you think it is?" Violet asked. "I don't know," Claus said, squinting at it, "but it seems to be moving right towards us." "We're alone on the beach," Violet said, a little nervously. "There's nobody else it could be moving towards." She felt the slender and smooth stone in her left hand, which she had been about to skip as far as she could. She had a sudden thought to throw it at the figure, because it seemed so frightening. "It only seems scary," Claus said, as if reading his sister's thoughts, "because of all the mist." This was true. As the figure reached them, the children saw with relief that it was not anybody threatening at all, but somebody they knew, Mr. Poe. Mr. Poe was a friend of Mr. and Mrs. Baudelaire's, whom the children had met many times at dinner parties. One of the things Violet and Claus and Sonny really liked about their parents was that they didn't send their children away when they had company over, but allowed them to join the adults at the dinner table and participate in conversation as long as they helped clear the table. The children remembered Mr. Poe because he had a cold and was constantly excusing himself from the table to have a fit of coughing in the next room. Mr. Poe took off his top hat, which he had made his head look large and square in the fog, and stood for a moment, coughing loudly into a white handkerchief. Violet and Claus moved forward to shake his hand and say, "How do you do?" "How do you do?" said Violet. "How do you do?" said Claus. "Odo yow," said Sonny. "Fine, thank you," said Mr. Poe, but he looked very sad. For a few seconds nobody said anything, and the children wondered what Mr. Poe was doing there at Briny Beach when he should have been at the bank in the city where he worked. He was not dressed for the beach. "It's a nice day," Violet said finally, making conversation. Sonny made a noise that sounded like an angry bird, and Claus picked her up and held her. "Yes, it's a nice day," Mr. Poe said absently, staring out at the empty beach. I'm afraid I have some very bad news for you children." The three siblings looked at him. Violet, with some embarrassment, felt the stone in her left hand and was glad she had not thrown it at Mr. Poe. "Your parents," Mr. Poe said, "have perished in a terrible fire." The children didn't say anything. "They perished," Mr. Poe said, "in a fire that destroyed the entire house. I am very, very sorry to tell you this, my dears." Violet took her eyes off Mr. Poe and stared out at the ocean. Mr. Poe had never called the Baudelaire children "my dears" before. She understood the words he was saying, but thought it must be joking, playing a terrible joke on her and her brother and sister. "Perished," Mr. Poe said, "means killed." "We know what perished means," Claus said crossly. He did know what the word perish meant, but he was still having trouble understanding exactly was that Mr. Poe had said. It seemed to him that Mr. Poe must have somehow misspoken. The fire department arrived, of course, Mr. Poe said, but they were too late. The entire house was engulfed in fire. It burned to the ground. Klaus pictured all the books in the library going up into flames. He'd never read all of them yet. Mr. Poe coughed several times into his handkerchief before continuing. "I was sent to retrieve you here and take you to my home, where you'll stay for some time while we figure stuff out. I am the executor of your parents' estate. That means I'll be handling their enormous fortune and figuring out where you children will go. When Violet comes of age, the fortune will be yours and the bank will take charge of it until you are old enough. Although he said he was the executor, Violet felt like Mr. Poe, the executor, had simply walked on the beach to tell them and changed their lives forever. Come with me, Mr. Poe, said, and held out his hand. In order to take it, Violet had to drop the stone that she was holding. Klaus took Violet's other hand and Sunny took Klaus's other hand, and in that manner the 3 Baudelaire children and the Baudelaire orphans were now led away from the beach from their previous lives. That is the end of chapter 1. Please tune in for chapter 2. Good night.